What is up, guys? Team Movie Fields here, and today we're going to be going over my personal picks for the top 10 meta decks of the September 2020 format. I think that these decks probably have the most potential going forwards. I think that overall they're very, very good choices. It is a personal opinion. Please keep that in mind. It's not something that is guaranteed. This is just what I think from what I've seen so far in playing on Dueling Book and watching people play on Dueling Book. This seems to be the most likely set of decks that I think is going to kind of run the meta. Obviously, the top 5 decks are significantly more important than the overall top 10, but I think that the overall top 10 are still going to have a very good chance of topping, at least semi-frequently. So the first thing we're going to do is start off with some honorable mentions. I'm not really going to explain each one in particular. I'm just going to basically show you what they are and let you see them yourself. So let's hop into the honorable mentions. So we have Sky Striker, Numeron variants, and Medolce. I feel that the overall validity of each of these decks is definitely still there. They do what they do best, and they're not, for the most part, excessively expensive too, which kind of helps that you can play these decks, and if you can learn them really well, you can play very well with them, and you can possibly top tournaments with them too. I think overall that any of these 3 decks is a very good choice if you don't want to play any of the top 10 decks that I have listed. I think that these 3 decks in particular do excel at what they do, and they're not that bad, honestly. They're pretty decent. I just would not place them directly into my top 10. But speaking of top 10, let's move on to slot number 10. I've given it to Altergeist. I feel that Altergeist having 3 Multi-Faker and 3 Imperm by itself is crazy. This deck has so much potential to do great things, and the fact that it still has the Multi-Fakers and Imperms is nuts by itself. That kind of goes hand in hand partially with the easy hand trap access. We also have access to so many other hand traps because the deck does have a good amount of space for you to work with. So you can play Ashes, you can play Nibiru's, Veilers, whatever you want to play, and still have, you know, moderate success with the deck. It's very, very solid overall, hence the board control.deck being, you know, deemed for this deck primarily most of the time because it negates monster effects, it negates spell and trap effects, it controls what your opponent has on the field. Overall, it's just a really, really good choice in this format. Hence the no thinking needed as well. You really don't need to think that much with this deck, which is one of the best parts. Basically anyone who has a functioning brain and a consistent pulse can probably play this. It's very, very simple and easy to learn. So definitely consider Altergeist if you are looking to pick up a deck this format. Moving on to number 9. We have Salamandra. Salad still doing what it always has. You know, the easy OTK access with access code talker is really, really nuts. I love the fact that it has access to that so easily. Hand traps for the win as well. You know, even if you go second, it's okay. You could just hand trap your opponent, and then you only need 1 or 2 cards to do your access code OTK, and then you just win again. Super, super simple and easy. It is consistent as always. The deck has always just been really consistent, which I love about it. And on top of that, it's super affordable as well. The deck is fairly cheap outside of Access Code Talker. Other than that, you're not going to be paying a lot unless you're paying an excessive amount of money for random hand traps, which you really don't need to. But moving on to number 8, we have Adamant. This deck got hit so hard with Block Dragon being banned. Don't get me wrong, you know, it still has the ability to special summon a lot and make a partial board, but the recovery from multiple hand traps is not very strong, to be perfectly honest. You get hit by multiple hand traps and you're going to struggle to play a little bit, unless you can establish a Guardian at that point, but even then there's still Imperm, and Imperm hurts a lot. You do have access to multiple negations though. You can set up a nice board and maybe your opponent won't be able to play through it. You could also still play Union Carrier with the Destruction Sword and give your opponent the extra deck block as well, which is really awesome. And then you can, you know, I think possibly we'll see this comboed with Megalith frequently. You know, Researcher was being played in Megalith as it is, but now I think that with, you know, Adamant getting hit, we might see Adamant and Megalith get kind of smushed together a little more frequently. So don't be shocked if you see that pop up every once in a while. But that is the number 8 slot. Moving on to number 7. We have Orchest. This got no hits from the ban list, and Rusty came back, which is really, really crazy. Rusty was one of the reasons this deck was so good a while back, and it was part of the reason that, you know, Rusty got banned was because it was so playable in Orchest. The deck just really abused that card more than it should have. This deck also has an excessive amount of interaction on your opponent's turn. When it is your opponent's turn, you can do so many different things. If you have your orchestrated babble up on the field, just being able to just play cards from your graveyard on your opponent's turn is crazy, absolutely crazy. This deck also plays through multiple hand traps extremely easily for the most part. It's very rare that it doesn't, unless you open like really, really bad, and then obviously that's, you know, it's not necessarily on you. It could just be bad luck at that point. But for the most part, this deck plays through a lot of hand traps. And then Dingirsu. I mean, Dingirsu outs so many different things, especially Dragoon. It outs Dragoon because it doesn't target or anything, and it doesn't destroy. It sends to graveyard. So keep in mind, Dingirsu is one of the best cards in the game, regardless of what format it is. But that is the number 7 slot. Moving on to number 6, we have Burning Abyss / Phantom Knight. I think that this deck overall got a huge boost from Rusty, Seer, Graph, and Tour Guide coming back to higher numbers. And I just realized I didn't add a little dash there to make that a point, but that's okay. That's my mistake. But I think that overall this deck has so much potential post Phantom Rage, because we're getting all that Phantom Knight support in addition to what we already have, and having the BA cards. This deck is it's going to be absolutely nuts. It does have multiple interruptions, so in case no one knows yet, Tour Guide is a 1-card combo that ends you on Rusty, IP, Anaconda, Dragoon, and a Fogblade. So basically, just Tour Guide by itself, or you could do Fiendish Rhino Warrior and a Burning Abyss, or you could do a Graph and a random Burning Abyss monster, and it ends on the same exact thing, which is crazy. So keep that in mind, that, you know, the multiple interruptions are there. You can use the IP and Anaconda on your opponent's turn to make a Unicorn or an Appaloosa, and then you can use the Dragoon and the Fogblade as well. So you have a lot of different interruptions that you have. On top of that, if you have a Farfra to discard off of the Dragoon, you could also banish a monster on your opponent's field, which is even crazier. So multiple interruptions are definitely there. You can play a high number of hand traps or regular trap cards depending on the variation you're going for. I know in mine, I think I'm playing 6 hand traps. I think I'm playing 3 Imperm and 3 Ash, but you can certainly shift it up. And then, of course, Dante. I mean, why not Dante? But anyways, moving on to deck slot number 5. We have Dogmatica variants. I think that Dogmatica has, you know, a pretty solid reason to be put in the top 5 area, and I think one of the most important factors is the splashability that it has into different decks. So there's a reason that I did not put Invoked on this list as a specific deck, because I think that Invoked is just an engine that you could splash in with Dogmatica in other decks that we will end up getting to. But I think that, you know, that was the reason for me not including Invoked on this, is because Invoked splashes with these decks, and I think that these decks themselves are better than Invoked. So I think when you splash Dogmatica variants together, you're definitely going to see them doing fairly well overall. The deck is just super, super strong. The deck does have really, really amazing going second potential. It's honestly just so great with hand traps. This deck can do so many different things, and I don't think people even take that into consideration as much as they should. You do have excessive searchability in this deck. This deck really, really abuses the ability to look through your deck multiple times in a turn and basically get access to whatever cards you're missing to stop your opponent from playing the game. The deck also has non-targeting negations, which, you know, the Flordelis is really, really nuts, being able to just negate a card in your opponent's field. I think that card is just amazing. I absolutely love that card. If you guys saw my Zodiac Dogmatica variation, you can see how strong I think that card is, and I kind of discuss the overall splashability of the two decks together, which is really neat. And as I said before, Hand Trap City, you know, your going second potential is there if you play a lot of hand traps, and this format, hand traps are going to be very, very abundant. But that was the number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4. We have Eldlich variants. I think that the Eldlich variants and the Dogmatica variants kind of go hand in hand. It was very hard for me to pick which one was 5 and which one was 4. I feel like they're very interchangeable. I think that Eldlich is a very, very strong deck. I think it does kind of outclass Dogmatica. But I think that, you know, Eldlich just has a lot of ways to outclass a lot of decks because of the crazy recursion that it has through the spells and traps in the graveyard. Being able to not only basically have field and grave removal, but just keep using multiple copies of these cards over and over and over again. Super nuts. I really think it's crazy how great this little engine works and how many decks you can really throw it into. Honestly, you can play Invoked with this, you can play Invoked and Dogmatica with this. There's about 15 different ways that you can splash this deck together and make it function excessively well. Also, Big Booty Golden Lord, the card gets really high stats, which is crazy, and it's kind of hard to beat over. It's not easy at all. So keep in mind that Golden Lord does definitely have that ability to slow your opponent down. Your opponent won't be able to play that well, which is one of the reasons that I put it in the top 4. And then the first and second playability, even if you go second, your Golden Lord can out cards. You can play multiple hand traps and just go from there and just really cut your opponent off from doing any kind of crazy plays. But that is number 4. Moving on to my number 3 pick. I have Dinosaurs. This deck still has not gotten a ban list hit since Miscellaneousaurus came back to 3, which I think was like several ban lists ago. That was definitely several ban lists ago. I don't know why Miscellaneousaurus is still at 3. Honestly, that card should have been hit, or Overraptor should have been hit. One or the other. Probably Miscellaneousaurus, though. I think that card probably should have been hit first. Or just stayed at 1. There's no reason to bring it back to 3, to be perfectly honest. Ultimate Conductor Tyranno is a win condition by itself. Just being able to swing into every single monster the opponent controls. And if they're in defense position, you can just send them to the graveyard. And if they're not in defense position, you could just set them. And then swing and send them to the graveyard and hit your opponent for damage, which is super nutty. Hand traps really don't hurt this deck either if you have the Miscellaneousaurus. That's the crazy part, is that your opponent can be like, oh, okay, I'm going to Ash or Imperm you, and then you can just chain them with Miscellaneousaurus, and then they're like, oh, well, that just kind of sucks. Super crazy how that works. I think it's absolutely nuts. Deck has multiple variants. You can play like a pure, you can play like a True King variation. I don't know about a Synchro variation in this format, considering the hits that we got through the ban list, and maybe it's possible. I don't know if a Synchro variant is possible. We'll just have to see and find out. And then this deck can succeed going first or second. I think that the overall playability is there no matter what. If you set up an Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, your opponent is going to struggle regardless. And then your opponent is really just going to look at your board and go, wow, I can't really break through this, because you're going to set all my monsters. So that's the really good part about this. But that is number 3. Moving on to number 2. I have Infra Noble Knight. This deck has a ridiculously high ceiling for combos. I've been testing this deck a lot lately, and I can't even begin to express the ability to make combos that your opponent is going to struggle to get through and not even be able to play through if they try. This deck does so many different things, ending on multiple negations and hand stripping and leaving some of your monsters in the field untargetable or unable to be destroyed by card effect, which is really powerful as well. Ripping cards from your opponent's hand is really important too, because you do get that hand knowledge from them, and then you know exactly what to negate, when to negate it, and why, which in my opinion is probably the most deciding factor in whether or not you want to play this deck. It gives you the ease of looking at your opponent's hand and determining how you're going to play the rest of the game. The deck also has strong follow-up for multiple turns. We have the ability to add Gear Freeds to hand during the end phase, and just go off with the Gear Freeds, which is absolutely crazy. I think that's by itself worth playing. Gear Freed is one hell of a card. I love that card so much. And the deck also plays through multiple hand traps most of the time. The reason I say most of the time with this deck is that there have been several times where I have played in a sold out, and I've gone a sold effect to try and special summon, and my opponent's like hit me with an Ash or an Imperm, and I have no way to play through anything else. But that doesn't happen super frequently. It's only on occasion. But that is number 2. Moving on to number 1, most people can probably guess what it is already. It's most people's top pick, and that is Dragon Link. This deck suffered no major ban list hits, which is crazy. I thought LP was going to get banned for sure, but it didn't. I don't know why we're kind of like playing around and leaving that card in the format, but we are for whatever reason. I guess it's just not that powerful of a card for whatever reason. I really don't get it, but deck suffered no ban list hits. It is super consistent. You only need 1 or 2 cards to really start your combo, and basically end on a couple negations or OTK your opponent, whatever the case may be. You do have the ability to do an excessive amount of things with this deck. It does play through multiple hand traps. This is probably the most resilient deck right now to play through Nibiru. Really plays through Nibiru really well. And that's one of the things that I like about it, is that I can get hand trapped like 3 or 4 times and possibly still play if I draw, you know, all the cards that I need. There are going to be times where you can't play through an excessive amount of hand traps, but that's any deck. You're not always going to draw every single combo piece that you need, but with this deck, most of the time you do, which is really good. And as I mentioned before, it can go first or second. You can either build a board or OTK, which is really crazy. And this deck is also really, really good with 40 or 60 cards, or really honestly anything in between. I've seen a lot of people who, you know, try and keep it anywhere from 50 to 60. I personally like to keep it around 45. I think 45 is a pretty good number, but if you want to go 50 to 60, that also works. But that basically rounds up the top 10 deck that I think that is going to do well this format. I think that these decks overall are super, super strong, especially the top 5 decks. But going from basically deck number 6 to deck number 10, I think that they also have a super high ceiling to do very, very well. So, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to let me know what you think in the comment section down below. And for right now, this is Team Yugi Fields signing out.